Good morning. This morning we're going to finish up the dough box. First thing we're going to do is put a lid and lid trim on it. And then I'm going to show you some of the more interesting features I guess, maybe strange aspects of boxes that have splayed legs and splayed sides. And give you an idea as to how you cut these things on the table saw or indeed the chop saw. But let's finish up the lid first. And to do that, I'm going to start off by adding a couple of layers. And because I already have seams up here, I'm not going to add layers in the usual way by using this, because if I do, it'll add a layer to all of these seams. What I'm going to do is use my tool over here called Add Invisible Layer. Actually, I can add a visible layer since I have perspective chosen. So I'm going to add two visible layers to perspective. First one's going to be the lid layer. And the next one's going to be lid trim. Now that I have those layers, I can go about drawing the lid and lid trim. First of all, let me get my camera in parallel projection because it's easier for me to see what's going on. Next thing I'm going to do is create a surface on the top. Now I'll use the rectangle tool to do that. Zoom in really close here. Make sure I get the right spots. Now I've got a surface. And I want to bring that surface out about 1/8 of an inch so that the lid has 1/8 of an inch clearance all the way around. And I'll do that with the offset tool. And I type in 1/8. Now I've got two faces and two perimeters. The inside one I want to get rid of, so I'll click twice and hit delete. That still leaves me the outside one. And that one's hanging over both sides by 1/8 of an inch. And let's just check out both corners, make sure that's the case. It is. Okay. Now I can give this thickness 3/4 of an inch. And I'll immediately make that a component. And I'll call it lid. And I'm going to put it on the lid layer. All right, now I need to add some trim. The easiest way to do that is I'll find the center point on this edge right there. Come down along the blue, 1.5. My trim is going to be 1.5 inches wide. Come out along the green, 3/4 of an inch. Trim is going to be 3/4 of an inch thick. Up along the blue, 1.5. And finally just complete the rectangle. Now I'm going to round over these edges. An easy way to do that is to take the tape measure tool, draw a couple of construction lines. I'm going to come down 1/4 of an inch. Not sure that's going to look good, but let's just do it. 1/4 of an inch. Up 1/4 of an inch. And I'll use my arc tool instead of the circle tool. What I'm looking for is for it to say it's tangent to edge. That means I've got a 1/4 circle. And now I can erase things I don't want. All right, now I need a path to use the offset tool to create the trim. And the easiest way to do that is to create one. I can't use the lid because it's a component. But what I can do is create a path by creating a face. Remember, when I use the Follow Me tool, I can either create a path with lines or I can create a path by choosing a face, in which case it'll follow the perimeter of the face. So I'll just choose this face, Follow Me tool, hover over that little cross section I just created, click, and I've got a face, or I've got a trim. Now, the problem with this trim is that the colors are the inside side colors. So what I'll do is I'll just click everything, right click, and say reverse faces. Now I want to delete the face on top. That's not part of the trim. I've got to fix the trim up a little bit. Got to connect these lines. And you got to zoom in real close to make sure you get the right point. If you don't zoom in real close, when you think you're getting that point, you might be getting that point. And that would be a disaster. So zoom in close, make sure you get the end point. And I have to do the same thing on the bottom. Okay. Now normally what I would do is I would take this structure that isn't a component yet, and I would create two components, a long trim piece, and I'd make that a component and place it on the front edge and the back edge, and a short trim piece, make it a component, place it on the right end and left end. But for expediency's sake, I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to make this all one component and just call it lid trim. And I'll put it on the lid trim layer. There's a bug in SketchUp, and sometimes it changes the active layer on me. So I'll have to change it back. I have my little layer management warning to let me know that. So I just changed it back. I'm going to select this again, put it on the lid trim layer. Okay. Now the problem with not separating this into two components is if I select it, you'll notice the bounding box is very large. That'll produce a cut list. When I used my cut list bridge to produce cut list, it'll produce a cut list dimension that is terribly exaggerated and large. So that's one of the reasons I break this into parts, is to get an appropriate cut list. All right, but the lid's done. Let's go on to bigger and more interesting things now. Let's first of all just update perspective here. Okay. All right, now here's the really interesting thing that I want to talk about today. We created this thing out of splayed legs and splayed sides. And our splay, if you remember, was 15 degrees. And we would expect to see the number 15 degrees sprinkled throughout this thing. Well, you in fact aren't going to see it at all. Well, let me show you. What I did is I took one of the legs. Let me go back. I simply copied one of these legs and I put it on the top of a table saw. This is a table saw, or at least my version of it. And what I did was I arranged it so that one side was laying flat on the table saw. And if I look at it from the top, one edge is laying parallel to the edge of the table saw. And in SketchUp, this is nice because what I can do is I can measure this angle here. This is the top surface of the table saw, and I'm going to go to this intersection here where it lays on the surface, and there is an intersection here where the taper begins. And I'm just going to click on that. Whoops, wait a moment. I'm going to take my protractor tool, make sure it's got the blue, meaning that I'm in the red-green plane and the axis of this protractor is the blue axis. So I'll hold the shift key down to make sure it doesn't change. I'll go over to this point, click it. Now I can let up on the shift key. And I'm going to go up along the green axis and then come over, measure that point. Notice that says 4.27 degrees. Well, when we were drawing this thing, we never used an angle like 4.27 degrees, but we're going to use it today. But not immediately. The one we're going to use first, we'll use by looking at the front of this leg. And again, this time holding the protractor over the green plane, which is the red-blue plane, with the green as the normal axis to the protractor. Hold the shift key down. Go to this point here where this edge intersects the table. Go up along the blue. And then come over and measure this. This time we notice it's 3.84 degrees. And by the way, it's not 3.84 degrees, it's 3.83 something, 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 something. And if I wanted my drawing to come out perfect, I would choose far more decimal points than 2. But we're going to ignore that for the moment because in the shop you can't choose more than 2 decimal points anyway. So we'll ignore that for the moment. All right, so that's the angle we want, 3.84 degrees. What I want to do is I want to tip my table saw blades 3.84 degrees. And in this next drawing, that's exactly what I did. I tilted the table saw blade 3.84 degrees. I took a piece of stock that was 6 inches. I'll show you that here. 6 inches by 2 inches. Why did I choose 6 inches by 2 inches? Well, the leg itself, if I look at the end of the leg is 2 inches thick in one dimension. It actually requires a piece of stock in the other dimension that's 2 9/64 inches because of this shape of the splay. Splay created a parallelogram. And so I no longer need stock that's 2 by 2. I need stock that's 2 by 2 9/64. So I start out 2 9/64 is close to 3, so I doubled it and made it 6. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this angle right down the middle of that stock, and then that will give me, that's this piece right here, that will give me the leg stock I'm working on, it'll also give me a helper stock. Why do I want a helper stock? Well, let's go to setup number 2. What I'll do is move the fence, put the helper stock next to it, which still has a right angle on this edge, and this angle, this 3.84 degree angle on this edge, which is the same as the one that I just cut, and now I can cut the second edge. So in other words, with this second cut, I'm going to cut this edge. The first cut this edge, but it's sitting against this helper stock right now. And now with this second cut, I'm going to cut this edge. And you can see that here. All right. So now we made our second cut. We got this edge and this edge cut. Next thing I want to do is cut this face right here. This face right there. That's the face I want to cut next. Well, to do that, what I need to do is realize that in order to cut it, this edge right here has to be parallel to the saw blade, the table saw blade, which means I've got to rotate it. Well, one way I can do that is choose it. Well, no, the first thing I will do is this. I'll use the tape measure tool and create a line that's parallel to it and out some distance. Now I'll take a line that's parallel to the edge of the table saw over here, and I'll just intersect this line almost anywhere. Doesn't matter where. Now I'll choose this leg, use the rotate tool, start off where these two lines intersect, right there. Go up along this axis here, this one here, which is the one that's parallel to that edge already. Now I'm going to move that edge so it's parallel to the saw blade. There I go. Now that edge is parallel to the saw blade. And when I did that, I should have looked at what the angle was down here. So I'm going to back up, do it again. Let me choose that leg first. Rotate it again. And now I'll look down there and I see that the angle is 4.27 degrees. So I've got to remember that angle, 4.27 degrees. I'm going to write that down. Now what I want to do is look at this from the front. By the way, to do this, and realize that what I want to cut, the face I want to cut is down here, this face right here. So looking at it from the front, I want to measure that angle right there. Now you might think it's the same as our 3.84 degree, but let's see. Again, I'm going to hold the green protractor by using the shift key. And I can go to any place on this edge. Go up along the blue axis. And now come down here to that edge. Notice this is 4.93. That's different than the 3.84. So now I got to re-tilt my table saw blade from 3.84 to 4.93. Well, in setup 3, I've done that. changed my table saw. It's now just a little bit steeper. I've aligned my leg so it's parallel to the table saw blade. And I created a jig. This is the fence right here. I have a board down here, 3/4 inch board, and glued to it is a guide board. I still have my helper stock with the right angle on one side. This is a right angle here. This was the original angle I cut. This is the leg stock with 2 faces, and now I'm cutting a third. And if I look at this at another angle, you'll see what I'm doing. Well, let's look at it from the top. All right, the guide board actually is cut to the angle that I need, to this angle here. Let's take a look at that. All right, 94.27, which is the same as the 4.27 that we measured before. So that's set to the 4.27 angle. And my blade is set to the 4.93 angle. And now, by setting the fence the appropriate distance away, using this board down here on which I mounted this guide board, I can put my helper board here and put my leg up against it and make this cut. So notice what I've got now is I've got this face, I've got this face here, I've got this face, this face, the top and bottom faces were the original face. The only one I have left to cut is this one right here. And I'm going to leave that to the student to cut. Let you figure that out. You've got all the pieces you need, so I'll let you figure that out. But notice the angles that I'm having to use here, these compound angles. 3.84, 4.27, 4.93. These are not angles that we used in the drawing of this part. 15 degree was about the only, 15 degree and 90 degree was the only angles we really used. But you can see that's not the case when we go and take this apart and look at things. Let's clear all this out. Get rid of guides. Now let's bring the sides in. Here's our sides. And let's just look at these. Front view, end view. One of the angles I want to measure right off the bat is this angle. In other words, if I were to lay this side right here flat on the table saw bed, what angle would I have to set my saw blade at in order to cut this side right here? Recalling high school geometry and maybe early college analytic geometry, you'll know that the angle between two sides or two surfaces or two planes is the angle between the normals of the two planes. So let's just look at what the normal, or by normal I mean a line perpendicular to the plane. Let's look at what the normals are. And I have a tool right here, this little red pencil with the green vertical line. It's called Draw Normal. If I choose this plane, click it, and then pick a point, it's going to draw a line normal to that plane through the point that I pick. So let me pick this point right here. And there I go. I've got a line that's normal to that plane going through this point. Now I want a line that's normal to this plane going through the same point. And I've got an angle here. That angle is going to be the angle that I have to set my table saw blade to. And so let's see if I can measure that angle. Let's see whether it's in one of the RG, or whether it's in one of the, RG plane, BG plane, GR plane. Let's click here, go out along on that line, go to that line, and it looks like that is in the blue-green plane. And it measures 75 degrees. Well, we haven't used 75 degrees in this drawing either, or have we? 75 from 90 is 15. Wow. So here we go. We finally got a 15-degree angle. That's what would be required. Set the table saw for 15 degrees, and we can cut this angle here. But what about, let me get rid of my guides. If I lay this flat on the table saw or the chop saw, what would I have to do to cut this plane here? Well, let's see. I'll choose that. That's the side I'm going to lay on either the chop saw or the table saw. And I'll choose this point here. And then I'll choose this surface and this point. Now look at the acute angle. And I have a feeling that this time I'm not going to have one that's in one of the standard planes. And so to be sure I know what I'm doing here, what I'm going to do is create a plane. I'm going to click on that intersection, go out along this line till it says on line, any distance. Come down here until it says on line, and I'm going to complete it. Now I know that if I hover with my protractor over that plane, I'll be able to measure the angle on the sides of that plane. So I'll hold the shift key down, go here, come out here, up here, and notice it's 93.84 degrees. Boy, we've seen 3.84 before, haven't we? So it's not surprising to see it again. That's the angle I would have to set either the table saw or the chop saw to cut this angle here. However, again, if this were laying flat on the table saw, I'd have to make my blade 3.84 degrees, but I'd also have to do something to make this edge parallel to the blade. And so there's an angle there that I would have to create a jig for or something. On the compound miter saw, I just set the blade angle for 3.84 degrees and the miter for the appropriate angle. But anyway, what I wanted to demonstrate to you is this little tool that I have, this perpendicular tool, draw normal, and try to remember the trick that if you want to know the angle between any two planes, all you have to do is take the normal between those two planes through the same point. You may have to create a plane using those two normals and then measure the interior angle. It's pretty easy. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up at this point. We have ourselves a nice little dough box. We got some extra garbage up here, but that's okay. Got ourselves a nice little dough box, and nicely tapered and nice dovetails. All right, until next Tuesday, have a good week. I'll see you. Bye.